Recording. It's
All
all
right. All right, we're going to get started then. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here on December 12th for the Connecticut Paid Leave Board of Directors meeting. The meeting is being called to order and the time is 9:02. Amber, can you take attendance, please?
Sure. Thank you. Eva Bermuda Zimmerman.
Present.
Isha Canada.
Present.
I'm going to circle back for Adrian. I don't think she's joined us yet. Andrea Comer.
Present.
Michelle Gilman.
Present.
Sheila Hummel.
Present.
Ellen McKitterick. Fran Pastore.
Present.
David Salazar Austin.
Present.
John Scott and Michael Soltis will not be joining us today. Molly Weston Williamson.
Present.
Holly Williams.
Present.
Janae has not joined us yet, but she will be joining us at about 9:30. She had another commitment. And Justin Zartman will not be joining us today, but we do have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. And I'd like to thank the members of the public for joining us today. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Alice Pritchard, who has served on the Board of Directors as Commissioner Gilman's designee. She's taking a leave of absence from DAS to serve in a new role appointed by Governor Lamont as Executive Director of the Connecticut Technical Education and Career System. So she'll be stepping away from her position on our board. And I'd like to just express our thanks to Alice for her service and welcome Commissioner Gilman back joining us today. All right. Let's review the meeting minutes from November 14th. I'd like to ask if there are is any discussion warranted or if there are any corrections needed. Okay, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, may I have thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thanks everyone. The motion carries. We're going to be moving on to Spring Group, and they will be presenting their quarterly actuarial report. I'd like to turn it over to Harinder. Thank you, Harinder.
Everyone, good morning. Share my screen. Okay, so the purpose of today's presentation is to really present Q1 quarterly results. So this is for the period July 2024 through September 2024. We also have some results based on updated claims, an updated claims review that I'll be sharing at the end of that part of the presentation. So we'll start with the key results for this quarter. Overall, the actual net activity was minus 5.5 million. The fund balance at the end of the period, net of outstanding contributions and claims payments, so net of reserves, was 623.2 million. So this is all on an incurred basis, net of the reserves. The starting fund balance was 628.7 million. So this was as of the end of the prior fiscal year, so as of June 30th, 2024. Contributions earned 109.9 million. Investment income a little higher than projected at 7.8 million. Income claims was slightly lower than expected, so a little bit lower at 112.5 million. And other expenses at 10.7. So overall, the actual fund balance is $6.8 million lower than what was estimated previously based on the prior year-end results. That represents about 1% difference. With 623.2 million, today's fund balance continues to remain strong and does meet our funding metric levels. So our target. So if you look at all the targets, we're well below those, so we categorize that as meeting target as of today. We'll move on to the next page. This page provides a graphical illustration of the same data, same information that I showed in the prior page. Total revenue is 117.7 million. So we start at 628.7 million. We add in revenue, which is contributions and investment income, minus expenses, claims, and other expenses. We end up at 623.2. And on the right-hand side, we have comparison, just the prior projection that was presented back in August of 2020. This page provides additional detail data. But we had not planned to review this in more detail at this point, but I'll open it up for questions. This page provides the full year projection. So previously we're showing just the results up to the end of the September. This provides the full fiscal 2025 projection. And you see that the overall expectation is that net activity will be 16.3 million. So this has been revised from a previous projection of 34.5 million. So when we look at it, the updated projection shows that the fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2025 will be 645. This reflects an update primarily to the investment income, incurred claims, and other expenses, just based on the updated data that we had for Q1. So small change there, and overall small increase in the fund balance projected as of the end of fiscal. So this concludes the first part of my presentation. I will also speak about an updated 10-year projection that we have prepared for you. The first part of this is just to show what the average weekly payments have been doing over the last little over 2 years. And what you'll see is that, if you went back into 2022, average weekly payments in it were around between 5 and 6 million. As you know from all of the other presentations, the weekly benefit payments have increased pretty substantially. So about, call it 70% since 2022, about 13% just in this last few months. So if you were to look at these last few months, you can see that we're hovering around 8.5 million. Whereas if you look at the data a little bit before that, it was maybe 7.5 to 8 million previously. So we actually ended about 13% higher even compared to the data up to June. So the first 6 months compared to the data since June, I guess, is about 13%. The first 6 months are 30% lower, so the new data is higher. So just want to set the stage that what we're seeing is pretty high increases in weekly benefit payments, which is what we've reflected in our results. So what we ended up doing with this data is we looked at the underlying claims experience, and what we saw was that the incidence levels have increased. So we updated the incidence assumption. We actually have that in the appendix, actual assumption. But this provides an updated 10-year projection based on the data was. Looking at this, we do show overall the potential with the updated assumptions or the data to reflect an increase in claims. And based on that, the net activity is actually lower over the next 10 years. And we see a scenario where net activity is negative throughout the 10-year projection, more or less. So in other words, the income earned, so contributions and investment income, is lower than the claims and other expenses. Now the fund balance, given that we do have over 600 million of funds, what that does is it dwindles over time based on this projection. So this is just one set of numbers, but it is one set that we did want to show you as an updated baseline results based on the claims increasing and showing this higher trend overall. What we also did was we looked at several scenarios. We've sort of simplified it down to these four. The green line here is what we're showing. And again, this is the fund balance. So it's starting a little over 600 million, decreasing down to a little under 300 million, 200 and 300 million, that baseline scenario. We do have a scenario where if the claims are higher, this yellow line by 5%, then it does mean that the fund balance will decrease faster. If the claims are obviously lower than what we have estimated, so just that sensitive scenario, shown that as well, that effectively means that the fund balance remains closer to the $600 million number at the end of 10 years. And the third scenario we showed, if claims are higher by 5%, but also the contributions collected are lower by 5%, what that would do, and that would be, that would mean that your fund balance runs out faster. So just another scenario. And there are more extreme scenarios that you can envision, right? Such as during a recession, let's say, unemployment is higher, you collect less. Maybe claims are also increasing, or scenario such as the pandemic, where you might have similar type of effect. But just for the purposes of this illustration, we wanted to show you alternate scenarios, just reflecting what we're seeing with the more current data. And really, this is driven by the fairly strong increase in claims paid that we're seeing today. The reason we're looking at a 10-year horizon is we had sort of established that when we're thinking about rates, what the rate should be. Should we stay at the 0.5%, or look at something different, lowering it, increasing it, and so on. And so what we also did was we did the calculation that we had established several months ago, where we would look at a 10-year horizon, think about this program over the long term, because we do want it to be sustainable. And also thinking about making sure that when we had looked at this, we talked about a target fund balance, so making sure we have enough cushion to withstand some negative scenarios, if you will. So we said, okay, we simplified it down to saying, okay, we want to have 10% of contributions at 0.5%, and then also 25% claims over for 3 years. So I kind of have that, and so to end up with 740 million, which is the calculated sort of cushion in 10 years. So this is not today's dollars, it's in 2034, I guess. What that would mean is that if we were to do the math, the calculation using the calculation that we had established a few months ago, that would mean that the rate would need to increase by about 8%, which is an increase from 0.5% to 0.542. We round it to 0.55%. Not a big increase in the bigger scheme of things, but that's kind of what it would need to be. I recognize legislative restrictions around that today, but just wanted to kind of point out what we're looking at, and also that more discussion to come on this topic. On that note, I'll pause and open it up for questions and other comments.
I have a question, Fran, if that's all right.
Of course.
Thank you. So I just, could you go back to the slide that you have that showed the various scenarios graphically? Yeah, that one. So the green one is, the green solid line is current state. So barring any economic depression, right, the fund, we're going to start dipping into the assets of the fund at a greater pace than we're depositing them come fiscal 26.
Yes,
Is,
so.
I just want to
actually
make
the
sure that I'm right
numbers-
there. Okay.
The numbers are here. You know, the numbers are very sensitive, I'll say, to small changes. So even fiscal year 2025, this updated projection shows net activity of 8.2 million, which is not a lot. Like that's about this way, so maybe 1 to 2% impact could easily swing this to be in the negative territory. And certainly, my comment on related to that is also that, just for context, we've seen pretty dramatic increases that are much more than 1 or 2%. It's, you know, even just in this last few months, we've seen a pretty material increase in the average payments coming out. So yes, the scenario does show negative numbers here, but also even for this fiscal year, we could see a negative number because this is just one set of numbers projected. So just quality to add a bit more context to the numbers as well, to add on to what you said.
So can I just make sure I am understanding just one thing? So are you saying that the projections are a little bit more conservative than the actual increases you've been seeing over the near term in claims? Or that higher growth in claims in the near term is factored in? I just want to make sure I understand.
So yes, it has been factored in, which is why we have revised our projection based on looking at the more recent data. I guess what's not as clear is how the next few months will play out. Like sometimes we do see, and as we've seen, like we have seen a little bit of volatility in the numbers, and certainly if you look at it, maybe even broader, more of an increase. We have built in a small increase in incidence levels, even going into up to 2028. So that's kind of where we pegged maturity of the plan, if you will. So there is a small increase in the incidence levels that's built in to these numbers, but you know, while we have reflected all the data yet to date, I guess the cautionary note is that the numbers would be different, can be quite different from where we want to project it, and that's why we're also looking at scenarios.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the last slide that you were showing on contribution rate changes, or maybe the second to last slide, I think that I just want to make sure that I'm drawing the right conclusion. That also demonstrate, yeah, at the bottom. So that also demonstrates how sensitive small changes are going to be to the entire financial formula that kind of drives the health of the fund. I guess I'm talking myself into my answer. So, all right. Yes,
I mean, we recognize that there's a cap of 0.5%. So that's in place. We can't actually collect more money without changes in legislation. But you know, that's what it would take. Yes, it's a small change, and to your point again on that, but also we may not have the opportunity to make that change without maybe some more planning.
Harinder, can I just jump in? Because there are some things we talked about the other day that I don't think have been brought out. So we had asked Spring to do this updated analysis with the updated incidents because we were seeing faster than expected growth since the spring, as we've been talking about. Pretty much every month we've been like, hey guys, it's been going faster than we expected. So the updated incident rates that are reflected in these numbers are new. Could we go back to the first slide that shows the claims data? That one, yep. So as you can see, the trend lines are just, the angle is more acute. The angle is sharper. The slope is more steep, which should not be a surprise, as we talked about in July. we said, look, our estimates in March are out of date. We've revised these estimates in July. We've continued to revise them. There is still good news, right? The fund is still solvent. The fund still has money in it. We've got the ability to continue to pay benefits into the future. But we just have to be really cautious and really careful because, as Arinder said, this is very sensitive and reacts to slight changes with pretty dramatic results. So we'll continue to keep a really close eye on those trend lines. And the reason we look 10 years in advance instead of just 3 years in advance is so that we have the time to make the adjustments needed. So I just want to reassure that although this is, nobody likes to see negative numbers, me most of all, we don't have ultimate negative numbers. We still have a good fund, but we're just the reality that we've been talking about for the last 18 months, which is that we're a new program, our incident rates are climbing. It's all coming true. And so we wanted to make sure that we were very, very clear with you all about what we're looking at. Molly.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to the staff for requesting the updated evaluation. I think it's really helpful context given that the real world data is changing and we should be incorporating that speedily. I think just two things that are worth pointing out, which I think is everyone agreeing. One, I think everyone is on the same page about this, but I think it's worth saying out loud. Incident rates going up is good. Paying out more money is good. It means we're putting more money in Connecticut workers' pockets. And I think everyone is already saying that already, but I think it's worth saying explicitly at the same time as we're looking at the impacts on the fund and at our long-term ability to keep putting money in Connecticut workers' pockets. The second thing I think is worth highlighting, as we're looking at these long-term trends, as we're looking at the fact that we are, as an authority, severely constrained in our ability to respond because of the cap on contributions. A thing that I think is worth pointing out here, as we've talked about the cap a lot, is the cap itself is 5 years old. It was enacted in 2019, which means it was based on information that was already a year or two old at that point, right? It was based on, because that's the nature of time. So at this point, we're making decisions in 2024 going into 2025 based on, at best, 2017, 2018 information. And we know a lot more about Connecticut now because we have real world Connecticut information. We know a lot more about how to run these kind of funds in general, including in 2019, there had not been a totally brand new from scratch program launched since 1950, which is not particularly helpful for thinking of things. So I think as we're thinking about how does the authority respond within the statutory authority we have, but also in terms of whether there might be a good opportunity for the legislature to think about giving us more flexibility to respond, given that we just know a lot of stuff that we didn't collectively know. The legislature in 2019 couldn't have acted on this information because it didn't exist, but does have this information now. And I think that we should be using that in how we think about evaluating the cap. And also, I think, reminding ourselves that no other state in the country has a cap at 0.5%. And that is a really significant constraint on our ability to thoughtfully and sustainably take good care of Connecticut workers into the future.
Thank you, Molly.
Molly, thank you. And thanks, Holly. I had similar questions, Holly, so thank you so much. I needed the clarity around that too. So given this information now, Erin, and you've seen this already and your leadership team has seen it already, based on what Molly just said, I feel like we need to kind of think about this as a board and maybe consider taking, I don't want to say taking some action, but actually thinking about what we can do. And that's not a conversation for today, but I think we've got to address what's in this report and talk about how we can proactively get in front of these scenarios and plan for them. And to Molly, to your point, like, I'm not even sure I was aware that we were the only state that had a cap on contributions. So I'll leave it at that, but Erin, we can talk about it. But I think it's safe to say that there are conversations that must be had about this. So I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. And that's
Anyone
really-
else? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just
Sorry.
wanted to say that I think we want to continue to see where things are going in terms of the trends to, I mean, seasonality does play a role. You can kind of see where
Mhm.
things are. So we really do want to get kind of at least another quarter or so of data and then be able to say, this is where we're going. This is continuing to grow. Because Harinder, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if we looked at 2024 as a whole, it's a 7.7% increase. So June is 13, but the year is 7.5. So we just
Yes.
need to really collect more data, see really where we're going because it is so sensitive. And then continue to show this data to the board and then work together to identify kind of what options and what levers are. As Holly pointed out, the fact that we could get back to that resiliency reserve that we had identified as being valuable and sort of what we would need before we made any changes to either the money coming in or increasing the money going out is only 0.05%. I mean, that's tiny. So we just have to continue really watching this closely, and that's what we'll continue to do and bring that to you.
Thanks, Erin. And we know you're on it.
Good.
Anybody else? Any other questions,
But I'll
comments?
just reiterate one key point here is that we are looking at it over a long period of time, which allows for time to make changes and have that impact, and also to see what could be down the road. So I think just wanted to reiterate that point because I think that's very important. That you're thinking about this over the long term, not just looking at it for next year.
Absolutely. And the scenarios also, you've taken into consideration a lot of different things. I think one of the things we also have to think about that we can plan for, another scenario is, at the federal level, there's a new administration coming in. We don't know what the factors are that could potentially impact the contribution rate, unemployment, employment. We just don't, there's so much data we don't have. So Harinder, really appreciate you and your team creating those scenarios for us and being conservative about them. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll continue
Thanks.
to prepare more scenarios for you as well.
Okay, I think we can move along then. Thank you so much. And here we go. Okay. So Michael, we would like you to please lead the discussion regarding posting a public notice in the Connecticut Law Journal regarding the proposed revisions to the Connecticut Paid Leave Employee Handbook.
Thank you so much, Fran, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Can folks see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So the Connecticut Paid Leave Authority is continuing our review of all of our internal policies. We just want to make sure that they don't get stale over time. So I think it's a good practice for us to review them, once every couple years or so. Employee handbook happened to be the next one on the list. Hopefully everybody received the red line version of the recommended changes that we have for the handbook. I'm not going to go through each change, one by one, but I did want to talk at a high level about the topics that led to some of those changes. So similar to some other recent policy adjustments we made, the first change was simply responding to the new legislation from this past session, in particular, as it relates to the employee handbook, the expansion of safe leave. So that was one of the reasons for changes. In addition, another change we made was we added a section regarding reporting any ethical or legal concerns to the CEO or the chairperson of the board. The authority already has our own ethics policy. There's also a state employees ethics policy that applies to us as well. A lot of that is focused on your own ethical behavior and sort of what's acceptable as an employee. We thought it would be helpful to also add, make sure that people were aware that they are free to report any ethical behavior that they see others engaging in or illegal behavior and not fear of reprisal. So we just added that to make it extra clear that there's no reason why anyone shouldn't feel comfortable reporting those concerns to either Erin or to you, Fran, or anybody else if they feel like it's appropriate. So we added that section just to make that clear. The third section we added was better definitions and more clarity around work schedules, what a regular work schedule is, as well as what's considered to be in attendance or potentially being absent. This is not meant to, I don't think we're having any issues with this authority. It's just meant, I think it's better to have it written down so we're all on the same page. I think it's good for both supervisors and employees, particularly as now we're a little bit larger of an agency than we were in the past. So there's additional language there about what it means to be absent from work. The fourth section, similar topic, adding clarity as around vacation, sick time, and personal time accruals. I think we had just some language that was missing. So we didn't make any changes to how these are accrued or how they're used, but more about just defining it better in the handbook. The next item is just strengthening the language. This is another item where there's no real change in intent, just making sure we're clear about how the equal employment opportunity and affirmative action policies work, including a reference to the Crown Act, which is relatively new legislation, as well as some wordsmithing around status as veteran and domestic violence as it applies to those policies. Second last item, and these are sort of getting less impactful now, just updating outdating references here. So we had some language in the handbook about what happens prior to December 31st, 2021. That obviously is not relevant any longer, so we decided to take that out. We had some citations to the Public Act rather than sort of where it's codified now in statute, so we adjusted that. And then adding Juneteenth as one of the state holidays because that is relatively new these past couple of years. And then last but not least, not a change in intent at all, just making sure we're consistent in the voice and the use of terms. For example, oftentimes we refer to employees as in a second person as you or your, and sometimes we refer to them as employees. So being consistent and just things like that in those terms. So hopefully nothing too controversial. The goal would be today to hopefully have the board vote to post it for public comment so it can officially be adopted in the February board meeting. But before that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments that the board may have. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Michael. Does anyone have anything that they want to add? Any questions for Michael or the team? All righty then, I think we can move along and ask for a vote. May I have a motion to authorize the authority to post the public notice in the Connecticut Law Journal regarding the proposed revisions to the Connecticut Paid Leave Employee Handbook?
So moved.
May I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you so much. We're moving right along to Erin. Let's discuss, Erin, if you would lead us in a conversation about the frequency of board and committee meetings.
Thank you so much, Fran. So, as you know, we've now been meeting for just over 5 years. At the very first board meeting, we identified, there we go. We identified the meeting cadence of, we had the 3 committees and the board, and that each would meet once a month. Over the years, we really have been using the committee meetings to discuss issues, develop proposals, solicit feedback before going to the full board. So that's been really the function of those committee meetings. And then at the board meetings, we share information and updates about the program as we have been doing. And we want to make sure that you as a board have all the information you need and the opportunity to make the various decisions that you are responsible for making. For example, decisions about the budget or the contribution rate or policies, as well as major contracts and major initiatives. So, I mean, at a very high level, we think that's kind of what we've been doing at these various public meetings. Many of you have expressed that you think perhaps we don't need to meet quite so often. And we want to be responsive to that and make sure that we're utilizing your time as efficiently as possible, because your time is valuable and we want to honor that. So we have some options that we've developed. You can come up with others as well. we can maintain the status quo, which is that the board and each of the 3 committees continue to meet each month. We have scheduled 2 hours for the board meetings. The committee meetings, depending on which committee, are scheduled for an hour to an hour and a half. We rarely, if ever, get to those timeframes, so we could just shorten them so you have more time on your calendar. And we could be more proactive about canceling meetings. Right now, we try to make sure that we have some active business for each meeting, and if there is no real decision to be made, we will cancel. But we could be more aggressive about that and sort of say we need to have a little bit more substantive work so that we don't finish all the meetings in 10 to 15 minutes, which happens quite often with committees. Option 2 would be to meet bi-monthly, but alternate the months so that the board meets in January, then the committees would all meet in February, and so on and so forth throughout the year. So that no month goes without some sort of meeting, but we're not meeting everything all the time. Third option that we identified would be continue to meet bi-monthly, but have it be all in one month and then nothing the following month, so that the board and the committees would all meet in January, and February would be a completely off month. Fourth option would be for the board to meet monthly, but the committees to meet less frequently, or the board would meet less frequently, but the committees would continue to meet monthly. There could be other variations, including one which I didn't write down, which is the board votes today for what it wants to do and authorizes the committees to meet and make their own decisions at the committee meetings. Just a couple of things to consider. If we have fewer meetings, realistically, the meetings will be longer. So it really is that frequency versus duration issue, but the longer meetings may be more substantive and therefore sort of more worthwhile. We do have a few things that are set in policy or statute that specify specific timeframes. So one of those is our budget adoption cycle. In order to meet the plan of operations with regard to how we establish the budget, options 2 and 5, which are basically the options where the board and the committees are off sequence, we would need to hold an extra meeting in March, because you need to have a board meeting in March with those options, but we'd need a finance meeting in March as well. Similarly, with the contribution rate adoption, we must set the contribution rate by November 1st. We have established as a goal that we want to try to start those discussions in the summer with the effort to establish a rate in September, which we did this year. But if we're not able to reach that consensus as to what the rate should be, we would need to hold a meeting in October in order to meet that November 1st deadline. Finally, with the policy adoption cycle, currently we review both the drafts and the public comments with the Policy and Personnel Committee before going to the board. So if we were to adopt an approach where the board meets one month and the committees meet the following month, that could add some significant time to the policy adoption process if we continue with reviewing drafts and public comments with a committee before going to the board. There are alternatives. And finally, one of the values of having the meetings scheduled is that you know a year in advance when the meetings are. If we were to cancel meetings and then have to hold a special meeting, that just means that we have to find time in your already very busy calendars. So just a practical consideration. So those are the things that we had identified, but again, this is your board. We're here to serve you. So we really want to make sure that we're meeting at the cadence that you wish to meet.
Thanks, Erin. Erin, what is you're the CEO. What is your preference? Share with us how, your preference of how you feel about what we should.
From a purely pragmatic and scheduling sense, keeping the meetings that we have on schedule so that we meet every month and canceling more frequently simplifies life, right? It means that we don't have to worry about whether we have a meeting on the books if we need to meet. So that's a selfish perspective, but that is sort of the easiest one for us to do. If we were not to do that, I think I would opt for option 2, so that there's always an opportunity for us to meet with the members of the board every month, whether it be on a board meeting level or at a committee level. So, you know, either of those I think would be preferable to going, you know, potentially weeks in a row without seeing any of you.
Molly, just a question for you, since you have such perspective about, you know, what other boards are doing, just for informational purposes and reference purposes. Like, do you have any insight into that?
So one of the things that's distinctive about Connecticut as compared to other state paid leave programs is that we have this oversight board. And I think it's actually one of the core strengths of the Connecticut program, because there are some other states that have more advisory boards, which meet on a variety of different cadences. There are some states that don't have a clear equivalent, but the thing that I think is worth noting is, in addition to like the work we do, like this board is a huge part of the program's public transparency. Like it's a big part of how we transmit information to the people of Connecticut about what's happening, about like things like this actuarial report. Like it's one of the big ways that we transmit information. I think other states have to either have other ways that that information gets distributed publicly, or do not do as good a job about proactively communicating. It's not they're hiding it. It just there's not like a structured juncture that it's being communicated publicly. And so I think as we're thinking about the many different roles that both the board and the board meetings fulfill, I think it's helpful to keep both of those in mind. And since I have the floor, I will say I think keeping monthly board meetings makes sense. I think the committees may be different, and also it may be different by committee. But I do think even if there may be times when it makes sense to pull down particular meetings, I think that routine public transparency piece has a lot of value. And if what we're hearing from the staff is that keeping a monthly meeting on the books, even if we know there may be times we want to pull it down, like I think, you know, there are times of year that we know are often less work, or there's things that are happening cyclically. I would put a pretty strong vote in favor of keeping at least monthly board meetings on the calendar, and the committee stuff may just be different than that.
Meg, Ava has her hand up. Ava.
There you go, unmuted. So I am curious to hear from Erin about how long some of the committee meetings are actually meeting. So my opinion is that we go for option, what is it, option 3? I think it's option 3, the option where we combine, we make sure that the meetings that we have with the board are the same month as the meetings that we have with committees. But then we have 1 month on with meetings and another month with no meetings. So you're expanding the duration of the meeting, but you're not necessarily minimizing the amount of meetings. But that my opinion might change depending on what Erin says about what committees are doing internally. To echo Molly, I think it's really important to honor the board meetings and the structure of the board meetings. I think we use our time wisely. As a board member, I do appreciate how much work is put into advising us, clarifying, and I do not feel as a board member that these board meetings are too long or you are asking too much of us. I think it's the right appropriate amount of time. I do have concerns about making sure that we're using our committee meetings wisely, because some of them, just depending on certain months, are shorter. So if we have a frequency of shorter committee meetings, it would be more advantageous to have just a longer committee meeting than having 15-minute, 20-minute committee meetings. But I'm not sure if all committee meetings are seeing that same reality.
Great question. The committee meetings are absolutely short, and Amber is on top of this, sending me statistics, which I can't read because it's really small. Amber, would you just like to share that?
Sure.
Just it reads, just tell everybody what you sent me.
So the statistics for November's meeting was, as I get back to it, our policy and personnel ran for 43 minutes. The board was 105. Outreach and engagement was 35, and finance and audit was 44. In the 2 months previous to that, our policy and personnel and outreach and engagement meetings actually capped out at about 15 to 23 minutes.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Amber. Without statistics, I would say that outreach and engagement tend to be shorter meetings. I think they tend to be about 15 to 20 minutes. I feel like policy and personnel can range from 15 to 45. Finance, I feel like tends to range from 30 to 45. I don't think, sometimes we get close to the hour, but I don't think we've gone over the hour for finance. So I think, you know, and with full transparency, sometimes we have like a 10-minute meeting. You know, we share what we're going to share. There's no discussion. Everyone says great, and we move on with our lives. So we definitely have had those super short meetings as well.
Which, by the way, that found time on my calendar is sometimes great. So you know, I can't be the only one who enjoys that.
We promise we will never tell your coworkers that we're shorter than we scheduled.
So Erin, it would seem to me, I serve on several boards, and I serve on boards that meet quarterly. Or I'm sorry, the full board meeting is quarterly, some are monthly, and then to include my own, I do feel we need the monthly full board meeting. It sounds to me like I do believe that you have to have a finance meeting every month, committee meeting every month. I just think there's some things that have to be fixed, but it seems to me perhaps outreach and the personnel meeting, I guess I would question the necessity of a monthly meeting for those, and therein might lie the best chance for the investment, or for the I'm sorry, for making an adjustment in the meetings. As the authority, you know, ages, if you will, and different scenarios begin to pop up, and we're looking at what the future might hold, and et cetera. It seems to me that it's fluid enough that we'd want to keep up on a monthly basis with that, and again, just review the other committee meetings.
Thank you.
Adrian, I'm really happy you shared that, because I was feeling the same way as I was listening to the duration of the meetings. I think that's actually a reasonable suggestion that we should consider.
Thank you.
So
Anyone
one
else?
option, I'm sorry.
No, Erin, my apologies.
No, I was going to say one option is for the board to vote to set the cadence for the board meetings, and then also vote to authorize the committees to set their own cadence, so that at the next 3 committee meetings, we can set them. We, just from a purely practical perspective, to comply with FOIA, we have already reported to the Secretary of State 2025 meeting cadence. So all we would do would be to cancel some if the board voted to, or if a committee were to vote to have fewer meetings, but which is easy. So if you wanted to take that approach and let each committee decide for itself, that's something we could absolutely do.
Can I'm sorry, it's Holly. I can't find the raise hand function. I think and I'm not, as someone who has lots of meetings, I am definitely always in favor of trying to streamline, but despite how short sometimes the finance meetings are, for example, seeing the monthly financials on a regular basis helps you to the extent that there is a material shift from one month to the next, it helps you to have notice of that. so that maybe you're not shocked the following month or something like that. So even though it's short, I think it, particularly on the finance side, I think is important to have kind of a more frequent pulse for what's happening, particularly if there's a shock to the system, because it is very difficult to get special meetings on the calendar. So
Yeah.
I think if I were going to vote for something, I would vote for monthly board meetings and allow the committees to vote independently as to their cadence. That would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Holly. Erin, I have a question. I don't see anybody else's hand up unless I'm missing something.
I have a thought. So I'm in agreement with a couple of others of a monthly board meeting, and letting the committees choose their frequency as well.
Excellent. So my question is, can the committees just decide there's no need to meet this month? Do we actually have to take a vote on that to give them the latitude to create their own cadence, or could we just leave everything exactly as is and let the committees choose to, oh, we don't need to meet this month type of thing?
So just the way we've been doing it is, as staff, we develop the agenda, we'll reach out to the committee chair and say, we don't have anything to talk about this month. Or,
Right.
We're not, I think we canceled, for example, policy and personnel in September and said, there's one thing, it can wait till October. Instead of meeting on the Tuesday after Labor Day, do you want to just cancel? So that is basically status quo. So if we want to
Okay.
maintain status quo, and we can take the direction as staff, and I can take the direction as the leader to say, try to make them more meaningful. The one item of business is great, but it would be better if there were 2 or 3 items of business. So we can definitely do it that way. That would be option 1. It's the
So
status quo.
the only thing I would caution about that, excuse me, the voice, is if it's a timely cancellation, because that can wreak havoc with our calendars. I know I can speak for my own that these are just already placed on the calendar, and I might have done something else with that time had I anticipated
Yes.
that there wouldn't be a meeting. I guess that's why I would, and I do want to reiterate, I do think there has to be a monthly finance meeting. I think it's the other committees that perhaps some flexibility, but I would certainly opt for something that it's been formalized as it is now. If we're making a change, it seems to me it would be in the best interest of all to formalize, because just canceling here, canceling there, that can get to be a little messy.
Understood.
Just a thought.
Sure.
Thank you. Molly.
Thank you everyone thank you for the clarification. I'll say for outreach and engagement, as chair, I would value the committee having the chance to talk about changing our standing cadence. I think as opposed to policy and personnel or finance, we don't have the same kind of monthly numbers to review, and we almost I don't think we've actually ever had something that required a formal board proposal that we have to pre-review. So I won't speak for the other committees because I'm not on them. But I think for outreach and engagement, if the board wanted to give the committee the opportunity to talk about whether we want to adjust our cadence, I do think more like every other month might be more appropriate for that committee. But I think that's if there's an opportunity for each committee to decide that, I think at least for outreach and engagement, that would be really helpful.
Thanks, Molly. Ava.
I just want to make sure that we give an opportunity for community members who do look at the committee meetings, committee recordings, or are tracking the frequency, that they actually have a very clear date in their mind and it's not confusing. If we were to switch frequency unofficially, right, status quo, and for using the example of outreach and engagement, start canceling meetings, not only echoing the havoc it wreaks on our own personal scheduling, but it's also you're creating uncertainty with community members who are trying to keep abreast, keeping aware of what's happening, and that doesn't seem fair as well. So just putting it out there, if we do status quo, it might not be the best when you have to make sure that you're notifying and, you know, making sure that people know that that meeting's canceled, it's last minute.
Got it. Anyone else? All right, so I'm gonna need some help with this regarding a motion. It sounds like we want to keep the schedule of monthly board meetings, correct? We want to keep the schedule of monthly board meetings. It sounds like everybody is not, seems like a lot of folks are nodding their head, those of you that are on camera. And it seems like we want to give the committees the opportunity to set their own schedule without canceling meetings as an option. Is that right?
I think I would frame it, if you were framing a motion. to
Please,
say-
yes.
To move to, you take a motion to maintain the monthly board meetings and to
Mhm.
authorize each committee to vote at a committee meeting as to the cadence of the meetings in 2025.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so I think we're ready then to make a motion, which I will do. Is there anybody else who wants to share any thoughts on this topic? Okay, well, this was great discussion. Thanks, everybody, for sharing your opinion and your expertise and your experience. So I'm going to ask for a motion to retain the monthly Connecticut Paid Leave Authorities board meetings and to also authorize each committee to vote at a committee meeting as to the cadence of their committee schedule.
So moved.
Thank you, Ava. May I have a second? Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thanks, everyone. The motion carries. That was great. Really good discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Dave, we're
everyone.
moving on. Thank you. Dave, we're moving on to you to provide the finance and fund recovery update.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everybody. I am going to defer to my partner, Walter Hay. He is Walter Hay IV. He is our compliance and contribution manager, and he has been managing our fund recovery efforts, which, as you may remember, started back in July of 2023. So we've been doing it for about a year and a half now. And so he's got the latest stack of data to go over with everybody. So Walter, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Dave. I am sharing my screen. Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Fran and Dave. So here are some updates regarding our continued fund recovery notices. So again, our notices are continuing to go out to those employers and sole proprietors in our system that are either missing a quarterly contribution filing, a quarterly contribution payment, or perhaps both. To date, we've sent 7 quarters of notices, and that translates to us having sent over 124,692 notices for 51,689 unique employers. And this is for Q1 of 2023 through Q3 of 2024. That did just go out in early November. So all of these numbers are through the end of November in our system. We've had payments remitted to us on 17,415 employer notices in the amount of $5,642,910 for all 7 quarters. This represents 9,954 unique employers. And we have seen our largest volume from this activity beginning in Q1 of 2023. Almost a trend down. A few quarters have been up in those collections. But we have collected $4,408,432 in outstanding principal contribution due to us, $1,109,398 in penalty, and $125,079 in interest. Another impact of those notice outreach is that the employer accounts that we've been able to continue to update who are no longer covered by our program. And as of the end of November, we've updated the status of over 20,568 accounts in our system. to mark them as either having been closed, no longer having Connecticut employees, etc. So we continue to work with those employers directly through our case management system. However, we also work with our partner agencies and our partners as the third-party administrators who administer those payrolls for employers. So working with our partner agencies, Connecticut Department of Labor, Connecticut Department of Revenue Services, as well as those third-party administrators, we've updated 57% of those account status updates by working with them. And this means that as a result of that, we've also waived 49,096 notices for 27,159 employers in our system. Additionally, in January of 2024, we did start sending out our notices to our external fund recovery vendor. And then as of the end of November, we've sent 42,023 of our open notices for 15,653 unique employers to that vendor. And to talk about where our notices exist now, go to the next slide. So here we can see that of the notices issued, we have 19% that are currently open with Connecticut Paid Leave as of the end of November. 28% are open with our fund recovery vendor, TSI, and 13% have been paid in full, and 40% of those have been waived. So that does translate to roughly 47% still being open in our system, but we have resolved 53% of those notices issued. And talking about our fund recovery vendor, TSI, they continue to add on to the services that we provide, providing services like address verification to scour the records, do skip tracing services to find those debtors if we have an incomplete address in our system. So by providing those services, TSI has continued to provide that outreach and send people back to us to question their notice, work with them to update their account, remit a payment to us, or provide any other general inquiries that they've had. And as a result, we have received payments on 2,552 of those notices, totaling $849,276.99. And additionally, we waived 4,756 of those notices issued. Doing our vetting as we do currently to mark them either as no longer having Connecticut employees, closed, etc. Our relationship is coming up on a year, but a year as of next month. And to date, that means 17.39% of those notices placed to TSI have actually been resolved in our system. And this exceeds our original estimates of about a 5% fix rate that we were originally provided by our vendor, which is an industry standard. At the beginning of December, we did send another 10,862 notices for Q2 of 2024 to TSI. And of that, 7,320 were existing employers that had already had an open notice in our system, and 3,542 were new employers that we've not previously sent to our vendor. And I do look forward to providing an update to the board on the continued progress for our next quarter, Q2 of 2024 notices next quarter. Lastly, I'm just going to highlight on some of our case management inquiries and responses from the notices that we have sent out. So every time we send a notice, people do come back to us. They go to our website, submit a contact us case to us. As of the end of November, we have received 19,938 inquiries or cases submitted to us from these notices. The largest response from our notices is from our first two quarters, where we did receive 5,673 cases and then 3,946 cases. We have overall seen a trend down in the last few quarters, slight uptick based on our Q3 notices, where we did our Q2 notices that people responded in Q3, where we were up to 3,178. We're currently averaging 270 new cases per week overall. As of last week, we've been able to close 19,809 of those 19,938 inquiries into our system. And then 10,449 of those inquiries were what we would classify as valid disputes of notice. 1,874 were invalid disputes. We've seen about 1,322 duplicate case submissions to us. An additional 2,753 account closure cases. And then 1,595 cases where we've tried multiple times to get in touch with them. They've provided some base information with us. We're trying to get some additional clarification, and they just haven't responded. And then our last little pool of cases is general questions. Could be a TPA asking how to remit a bulk filing to her, an employer asking how to file and pay to us. We've had 1,816 of those submissions to us as well. As a team, we've now made 99,599 updates or actions to those cases, working 32,526 cases where multiple team members have had their hand on that case, because we do allow people the opportunity to respond, reopen their inquiry to us, ask for a request for reconsideration on a dispute of penalty, and provide us business closure paperwork if they haven't had that in their records just yet. And so we've been able to maintain our efficiency to provide 281 actions per day, 152 cases touched per day, while still trying to ensure that we provided the needed materials and guidance to those employers in our program. While our overall actions per day and cases touched per day have decreased slightly from our last updates, we have seen an uptick in TPA submitted cases to us. Those third-party administrators are submitting one case for multiple employers. So it does take a little more time to work each of those cases, as there are multiple employers on that inquiry that we are vetting with them. And lastly, another benefit of our notices is that people continue to reach out to them. We continue to encourage them to register on their accounts so that we have updated contact records. And we have seen 3,681 contacts on 3,449 employer accounts in our system since our notices went out. I'll pause here for any questions that the board might have. And okay, no further questions.
Thanks, Will. Anybody have any questions or feedback? Thank you so much, Walter. Oh, Ava, sorry, Ava. Sorry, I can't see everybody when the screen is when somebody's screen sharing, so my apologies. But Ava, go ahead.
I was curious, so in theory, if everyone were compliant, what is the dollar amount that it amounts to? Like, do we know, let's say in a perfect world, hypothetical, we were at like 99 or 100 compliance and everyone was paying out and everything was timely, how much more money would we have in our coffers possibly? And is that possible to know?
100% no, that is a hard answer. We do have a number of what we call missing filings. We don't have an estimate. We don't have a DOL update to that record. They're in a $50 penalty placeholder. We do get data from DOL to update an estimated value on some of those employers. But again, that's a gross number versus the FICA wage number that we are looking to report in our system. So we do have a value, I'd say roughly slightly higher than about 2 million. We are looking to clean that up over time. However, we have seen a number of our $50 penalty placeholders continue to come back as closed, not having any liability. But we do look to provide a better estimate of that in the future.
This is one of those areas where we have to simultaneously be comfortable with ambiguity while trying to figure out every which way to get more precision. We estimate that we have about last I looked, so Dave and Walter, let me know if I'm off, but our last estimate is that we have about a 95% compliance rate in terms of employers who are supposed to pay, who are paying. But our definition of employer is not found anywhere else. DOL has a different definition. DRS has a different definition. Secretary of State doesn't have a definition. So we do have that sort of, I've said before, we kind of paint in watercolor when we're dealing with these numbers, because there's just some information we don't have access to.
Stop sharing
Anyone,
that.
anyone else? Okay, thank you so much, Walter.
Thank you.
Any hands that are up that I can't see? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to the committee reports. Erin, Mike's not with us today. He's flying right now in the air, but would you share the policy and personnel report?
Certainly. So policy and personnel met on the first Tuesday of December and talked about the handbook changes that Michael already discussed.
Okay. Molly, you're up. Outreach and engagement.
Outreach and engagement met last month. We got an update on the great work that the team is doing in outreach and education, as well as an update on the podcast from Nancy.
Thank you. Holly, finance and audit committee report.
Yep. The committee met last month and received an update on the quarterly actuarial report, which was presented and discussed today, as well as the regularly reported financials, which Dave is going to share with the board this morning.
Thank you. Dave.
Thank you. Good morning again, everybody. Oops. Wrong one. Let's try that again. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to go over the results for the month of October and a preview of November, and also provide projections for the end of the fiscal year. So starting with our operation budget, our results for the month of October were $3.9 million for the month. We had a positive variance of over $567,000. We did have some negative variances on line items for the month, like actuarial services. That was a timing difference. We paid them a month or two later than we had budgeted. DAS services had a negative variance, but that's because we paid them in full towards the beginning of the fiscal year instead of monthly as we had budgeted. So the actuarial services variance has actually corrected itself year to date, and the DAS services one, while it's negative now year to date, will slowly even itself out to zero, or actually even ahead of budget by the end of the fiscal year. And fund recovery services, we had some back payments to TSI that we paid. So that in part is a timing difference, but we're also paying them more than we budgeted because our fund recovery efforts are better than we expected. But those will be funded by our fund recovery penalties, which also are better than budget. So those will be paid for out of the fund recovery penalty revenue. As far as the, and we did have a positive variance for the month, significant in terms of IT software licenses. But again, that's also a timing difference. We weren't billed for until the following month for a platform expense, that platform expense being Salesforce. So the majority of this variance will dissipate in November. Typical expenses for the month were payroll and related expenses, contact center, outreach, actuarial services. So all the usual types of expenses we have. Year to date, Our activity is just under $6 million, and we have a positive variance of just under $1.8 million year to date through October. Moving on to our bond account, our bond funds that we spent for the month were $83,000. That was a positive variance of just under $17,000. Year to date, we've spent just under $400,000. That has been on our fund recovery system. Money is being used to develop custom IT solutions to further improve it. We are about $100,000 greater than budget right now, but we do expect to be at about budget by the end of the year. And we do have the funds for it. We have just under $2 million remaining of the bond funds available. We'll continue to use those going forward. Moving on to contribution activity, we had almost $69.7 million of activity for the month. That was resulted in a over -$5 million variance. That, as we've been discussing all along, as a result of the benefits being paid, we paid almost $34.3 million. As Molly pointed out before, this is actually good. People are using the program. It's what we want them to do. On a weekly basis, that's about $8.6 million a month for the month of October. So that is around the $8.5 million that Harinder referenced before for the latest time period as far as an average is concerned. We did get the bulk of the contributions for the latest quarter in October, over $108 million, slightly below what we budgeted by about almost $339,000 for the month. But year to date, we are still ahead for contributions by over $2.6 million. Year to date, our total activity was over $76.1 million. We do currently have a almost $15.4 million negative variance. And again, that is because of the higher than expected benefits we've been paying, because the activity has gone up higher than when we originally prepared the budget over 6 or 7 months ago now. That variance is offset by higher contribution revenue than expected, as well as investment income for the period year to date. Just wanted to take a second to talk about the contributions and how they look historically. As Harinder had indicated earlier, the contributions for the latest quarter were $109.9 million. That is the third yellow column from the left. That is a $3 million or 2.8% increase over the same quarter last year. And year to date, our contributions are $16.2 million or 3.6% ahead of last year. So we're still seeing a trending up of contributions quarter over quarter and year over year. As far as the contribution fund itself, the fund at the end of October was over $642 million. That is a jump up from the number you saw last month. Again, because October is the month that the contributions are ultimately due for the most recent quarter. So that's when the bulk of them come in. Quick look at the balance sheet. Total assets are over $665 million. And again, the bulk of those assets are in our short-term investment fund account, which has almost $610 million. The investment account currently is earning, as of the end of October, was earning just about 5%. That's been down from the 5.4% it had been earning before. And that's as a result of the Fed fund rate being decreased. As many as you know, the the Fed decreased their rate again, but that's still higher than what we budgeted for the year. In terms of what this means for the year end, our operating results expect to be over $5.5 million, which is a positive variance of $3.6 million compared to what we budgeted. So what are the significant variances that are contributing to that positive variance? Well, number one, our pension overhead rate is lower than what we budgeted. The pension overhead rate is 48%, which is lower than what we have budgeted of 60%, which is right around what it historically been. The pension rate had been finalized and announced after the budget had been, so that's going to result in a positive variance for the rest of the year, and we estimate that variance to be about $1.1 million. The other significant positive variance is an IT consultant expense. That will be about $1.6 million. And that's because we are currently using the bond money because the IT items that we're using right now fall under the qualifications that we can use bond money for. So we're going to use that up. So we're going to use that first and then use the operating funds as necessary. There was also some positive variances in IT licenses, in outreach expenses, because the community education coordinator initiative that we have this year, we currently have 7 vendors instead of the 12 we budgeted. So we're going forward with those 7 for now. So that results in less expenses for outreach and actually also for legal because there's less contractual work and the like in setting them up. And the last piece of a positive variance we have is we have a $250,000 contingency that we don't expect to use. So all those factors are what factor in to the $3.6 million positive variance that we expect at the end of the year. As far as the contribution account goes, we expect our net activity to be about $16.5 million by the end of the year. That is over $46.5 million less than what we budgeted. I will point out this is still a positive effect onto the contribution fund of the authority. By the end of June, we estimate on a cash basis that the fund will have about $582 million in it. So it will still be solvent and in a good place by the end of fiscal year 2025. So the projection does bump up the benefits as we discussed because we've been seeing a higher amount paid. The contributions were coming in somewhat higher, so we did bump that up as well. Investment income will be higher than what we budgeted, but we did take into account the lower rate of interest that we're currently earning, that we have earned in the past, but that's still higher than what we budgeted. And the last piece I'll mention is that our benefit administrative expenses, we did bump those up a little bit because there will be a 3% increase as of January 2025. So we factored that in as well. I just want to verbally mention the results for November. I did have the schedule, but for some reason it disappeared from my screen, so I apologize for that. But our operating results, we had expenses of $1.5 million. That tends to be on the high side. That's because we had 3 pay periods in November instead of 2, so that was the main driving factor. The other significant item I'll mention is that our benefits for the month were $43.6 million. That was for 5 weeks. As you may remember, we reimburse Aflac on a weekly basis. So we had 5 weeks that we reimbursed them during the month of November, and that averaged to about $8.7 million a week. So we are seeing that number slowly continue to go up. So that was our preview for November and our results through October and our projections for the end of the year. If anybody has any questions at this time, I'm happy to answer them.
Dave, thank you for that detailed presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any questions, any feedback? All right, thank you. We are moving on to Erin.
Thank you so much. I just have 2 short announcements. One relates to the Code of Ethics. As you all know, as board members, you are subject to the Code of Ethics, as we are as employees of the state. When you all came on board, we had asked you to complete the Office of State Ethics online training to familiarize yourself with the Code of Ethics. As state employees, we actually take that training every year. And I think it's a good practice for everyone to get that reminder. So we are asking you if you would please complete the online training. We will send you the link. Some of you are state employees and are probably doing it every year as well. So if you've done it recently, just want to let us know that. That'd be great. If you were already taking it frequently, please let us know that as well. But we would appreciate everyone to get into the habit of taking that training on a yearly basis. So we'll send you the link and ask that you send Amber a note letting us know when you've completed it. It's fun. It's timely because a lot of it relates to what is and is not a gift and who is and is not allowed to give us gifts. So that's why we would like everyone to just be aware of those issues. And then on a much more fun note, we are going to be hitting $1 billion in claims paid to Connecticut workers sometime soon. We don't exactly know when, but we are within a couple of weeks of hitting that landmark. And so we reached out to the governor's office and are planning for a press event next Thursday. It's everything when you're working with the governor's office and the legislature requires a fair amount of coordination. So we will be sending final details to the board, but we wanted to just put on your, to make you aware that we are going to be doing it. Right now, it looks like it's going to be next Thursday afternoon in Hartford. If anyone would like to join us for this celebration, we would love to have you. We will definitely take pictures and share them for anyone who can't come. So those are my 2 pieces of information.
Thank you, Erin. That's so exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, is there any old business? New business? Okay, we're getting a half an hour back in our day, people. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Andrea. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. Great meeting. Happy holidays, Happy New Year. The motion carries. It is 10:30 exactly. Thank you all so much, and see you in 2025 or next Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.
Happy holidays.